Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to unpack some of the most influential literature in human history. We're diving right into the ancient texts of Genesis and Exodus to explore a really fascinating progression, the expanding circles of human relationship. Now, we're going to look at these texts objectively, strictly as literature and narrative architecture, just to see how they structure the whole concept of connection, starting from a solitary individual all the way up to a massive national community. Honestly, understanding this structural shift gives us an amazing blueprint for how we still view personal connection versus civic duty today.
Here's a quick roadmap for us today. First, forming the first human. Second, the first partnership. Third, the arrival at Mount Sinai. And finally, sealing the divine covenant. All right, let's dive into part 1, forming the first human from Genesis 2:4 through 8. So this section sets a deeply earthy, intimate stage for human origins. If you read it carefully, it literally strips away all the grand cosmic stuff and focuses entirely on the dirt right beneath our feet. The narrative gives us a super precise step-by-step sequence. It starts with a barren earth watered just by a mist. It's quiet. Then a human is formed directly from the dust of the ground, which is a really tactile image, right? Next comes the divine breath of life to animate that dust. And finally, this newly formed being is placed into a specifically planted garden, Eden. It's a very deliberate, localized progression. What's so fascinating here is the sheer micro-level focus of this text. I mean, it's just the individual, their physical origin, and their immediate quiet environment. There are no societies yet, no complex laws, no towering cities. The whole foundation of human existence begins in absolute quiet solitude, deeply connected to the soil. It is the ultimate literary origin story for individual identity.
Okay, let's jump right into part 2, the first partnership, found in Genesis 2:18 through 24.
Now, as you probably guessed, the story doesn't stay in that quiet solitude for long. The text drops this massive narrative tension with a really profound statement. Up until this point, everything in the broader creation story has been repeatedly labeled as good. So this is the very first time a disruption happens. It marks a foundational shift in the text's philosophy, basically saying that isolation is a fundamental problem that desperately needs a solution.
And that brings us to the famous parade of animals. They're also formed from the ground, they're brought to the human for naming, but ultimately, no suitable partner found. It's framed almost like the world's most unsuccessful speed dating event. But by having the human examine and name every single animal without finding a match, the text masterfully builds this incredible anticipation for the creation of someone who actually fits.
And this brilliantly highlights the literary shift that happens next. Pay attention to the verbs here. The man and the animals were both formed from the dirt, but the woman, she is uniquely described as being built from the man's rib. She isn't pulled from the dirt, she's pulled from the human himself. It's a linguistic choice that signifies an incredibly intimate, parallel connection that totally separates this new relationship from everything else in the garden.
This whole sequence culminates in the concept of becoming one flesh. The text uses this phrase to define the fundamental human partnership. It completely resolves that earlier tension of it being not good to be alone, presenting a union so close that it reflects their shared physical origin. This is what lays the deep literary foundation for the institution of human marriage and intimate partnership.
Zooming way out, we arrive at part 3, the arrival at Mount Sinai in Exodus 19.
Strap in, because we're making a massive thematic and geographical leap here. Leaving the interpersonal micro-level of the garden, we experience a total sensory contrast. We're trading the earthy, quiet intimacy of Genesis for a dramatic, awe-inspiring, and distinctly distant setting. Honestly, you couldn't ask for a more different environment than Sinai compared to Eden. The mountain is imposing, it's dangerous, and it is completely off-limits. According to the narrative, the mountain is absolutely engulfed in intense, chaotic elements. We're talking thunder and lightning, a super thick cloud, an unearthly loud trumpet blast, smoke billowing like a furnace, and the entire mountain trembling violently. The text is literally designed to make the reader and the characters feel incredibly small and overwhelmed. It creates this deeply tense preparation for a divine encounter.
So why all this overwhelming sensory overload? Well, because this serves as the backdrop not for a personal one-on-one relationship like we saw back in Eden, but for the establishment of a community-wide national treaty. You basically need a grand, terrifying stage to bind thousands of disparate individuals into a single, cohesive society under one shared law. The massive scale of the environment perfectly matches the scale of the societal shift.
Finally, Part 4, Sealing the Divine Covenant, in Exodus 24.
Let's look at how this macro relationship is formally cemented. The text breaks down a very complex ancient ritual into a crystal-clear chronological timeline. Morning starts with Moses building an altar. By midday, they're doing a public reading of the terms, the Book of the Covenant. Then the people give their verbal agreement. Next is this dramatic, highly visual moment where blood is splashed on both the altar and the people. And it all culminates in an evening mountaintop summit with the leaders. It's a highly structured legal and religious ratification process.
I really want you to notice the vivid contrast in how these foundational moments are sealed. Back in Genesis, it's the gentle, invisible breath of life that animates and seals the individual's existence. But here in Exodus, it's the striking, visceral, incredibly visible splashing of blood that binds the entire nation to its new laws, the intimacy of breath versus the gravity of blood. It perfectly encapsulates the stark difference between personal creation and national obligation. But then, the narrative of Exodus 24 ends with a surprisingly intimate moment right in the middle of all this grand chaos. The elders of Israel actually ascend the mountain, reportedly see God, and then they sit down and share a meal. Eating together is the ultimate ancient symbol of peace and agreement. It finalizes the newly formed societal bond, bringing just a touch of intimate connection back into this massive, terrifying macro-level event.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, we really have to ask ourselves a crucial question. How do these two completely distinct narrative settings, the quiet, peaceful garden shaping the individual and marriage, versus the chaotic, trembling mountain shaping law and society, how do they continue to subconsciously influence our cultural frameworks today? These texts lay down the literal literary blueprints for how Western civilization views personal connection versus civic duty. I hope this structural breakdown gives you a totally new lens to view these ancient, incredibly influential narratives. Thanks so much for learning with me today, and keep questioning the foundations of the stories we tell.